If this is true, then you were never meant to hear this. Not because it is classified, not because it is forbidden, but because knowing it changes your position in the universe forever. For as long as humanity has existed, we have asked the same question in different languages, carved into stone, whispered into the dark, written into science and religion alike. Are we alone? It sounded harmless, curious, almost hopeful, a question born from loneliness. But no one stopped to consider what it would actually mean to receive an answer, because some answers do not arrive as messages, they arrive as warnings. When the James Webb Space Telescope began operating, the world celebrated. Scientists spoke of breakthroughs. Headlines spoke of wonder, a machine capable of seeing the birth of stars, of peering through cosmic dust, of analyzing the atmospheres of worlds so distant that their light began traveling toward us before human civilization even existed. A telescope built to look backward in time. No one talked about the danger of looking too far. Because the deeper you stare into the universe, the higher the chance that something stares back. At first, everything followed expectations. Data streams, spectral lines, chemical signatures, water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, strange worlds, yes, but still natural, still safe, still comfortably explainable, until a pattern began to emerge, not obvious, not dramatic, the kind of pattern that only appears when someone refuses to stop looking. There were planets that should have been alive, rocky worlds sitting perfectly within the habitable zone of their stars, thick atmospheres capable of protecting liquid water, stable energy output, billions of years of time, more than enough for life to emerge, evolve, and flourish. Everything was there. Except life. Their atmospheres contained chemical structures that should not exist in equilibrium, compounds that should have reacted violently with one another, but hadn't, molecular arrangements that suggested constant regulation, maintenance, correction, as if something was actively preventing chemical decay. At first, scientists blamed instrumentation errors, new telescope, new calibration models, noise in the data. There is always a comfortable explanation when the mind refuses to accept the alternative. But then the same anomaly appeared again, and again, in different star systems, different regions of the galaxy. Always the same silence, not the natural silence of empty space, but a silence that felt organized. Someone eventually asked the wrong question, or perhaps the only honest one. What if these planets weren't dead? What if they had been emptied? The idea was unsettling. Life does not simply vanish without a cause. Catastrophes leave scars, radiation, debris, chaos. But this wasn't destruction. It was removal. And then came the realization that changed everything. When the data was arranged chronologically, the pattern revealed something horrifying. These worlds had not gone silent at the same time. There was a sequence, a progression, a trail stretching across vast sections of the galaxy. Not an explosion, a movement. Movement implies intention, direction, decision. It implies that whatever caused this silence was not random. It chose where to go. It arrived, finished its work, and moved on. And worse than that, it waited. Between one system and the next, there were gaps, long ones, measured in millions of years, perfectly spaced, as if time itself was irrelevant to it, as if patience on a cosmic scale was effortless. That kind of patience does not belong to young intelligence. It belongs to something ancient beyond comprehension. Meetings stopped being public after that. Data access became restricted. Certain names quietly vanished from research papers because a problem had emerged that could not be solved with equations. If this thing is moving, then it will eventually reach everything. When researchers projected the trajectory forward, the line did not end in some distant, irrelevant corner of the galaxy. It passed uncomfortably close to home, not directly, not yet, but close enough to raise a question no one wanted to ask out loud. Earth is not hidden. We have been broadcasting our existence for over a century. Radio waves, radar pulses, television signals, satellite transmissions, a constant stream of noise leaking into space. We assumed the universe was too large for it to matter, that no one was listening. But what if the danger was never being loud? What if the danger was being detectable? Because this intelligence does not behave like explorers, it does not send greetings, it does not build megastructures that scream its presence. Wherever it goes, the universe becomes quieter, simpler, less complex, as if complexity itself were a flaw. And here is the part that should make your skin crawl. There is no evidence of hatred, no signs of war, no aggression. That makes it worse, because everything points to something calm, methodical, something that does not destroy out of anger, but out of belief. As if it is correcting the universe. Life is chaotic, unpredictable. Species rise, compete, mutate. They alter atmospheres, consume energy, generate noise. Perhaps to this intelligence, life is inefficient, a statistical anomaly, a waste of matter. And the solution may be brutally simple. Erase it. Clean the system. Rebuild it correctly. If that is true, then life in the universe is not rare. It is temporary, a phase that exists only until it is noticed by something greater, something that decides when a system has run its course. And now we know. That is the irreversible moment, because ignorance was our shield. Knowledge stripped it away. We are no longer just a civilization shouting into the dark. We are a civilization that recognized the pattern, understood the logic, far too late. Every system studied shows the same thing. Activity increases shortly after detection, as if observation itself is the trigger. As if the moment a species becomes capable of seeing too far, it becomes relevant enough to be dealt with. Maybe that is why the universe feels empty. Not because no one was ever there, but because no one stays. And if you think this is still distant, still abstract, remember this. Extinction never feels imminent from the inside. Species disappear believing they still have time. The question is no longer whether we are alone. The question is whether we have already been noticed. There is a moment in every extinction event when the victims realize that survival was never the point. It is not loud. It is not cinematic. It arrives quietly, disguised as routine. For humanity, that moment may have already passed. After the initial pattern was identified, after the trajectory was mapped and quietly locked behind restricted access, the conversation changed. No one asked, "What is it?" anymore. The new question was far more dangerous. Why hasn't it come yet? Because delay implies choice, and choice implies evaluation. The uncomfortable truth is this: nothing in the data suggests urgency. Whatever is moving through the galaxy does not rush. It does not scramble. It does not react emotionally. It behaves like something following a long-established process, like a system executing a function it has performed countless times before. Which leads to a terrifying possibility. What if we are not early? What if we are on schedule? Across the dead system studied, there was a consistent sequence. First came detection, subtle, barely noticeable changes in background radiation, then a period of apparent inactivity, silence lasting millions of years, long enough for any local life to believe it was safe, long enough to evolve further, long enough to expand, to grow complex, to become interesting. And then simplification. Atmospheres stripped of biological chaos, chemical diversity collapsed into sterile balance, planets that looked peaceful from a distance but lifeless up close, worlds frozen in a state of artificial equilibrium, as if nature itself had been paused. It was never about destruction. It was about control. The most disturbing models suggested that this intelligence does not simply erase life. It studies it first, not out of curiosity, out of necessity, to understand how life organizes matter, how it exploits energy, how it spreads. Life is a variable, and variables must be accounted for before they are eliminated. Which means that somewhere in the universe, long before those planets went silent, something was watching them. The same way we watch insects in a sealed container. And now, for the first time, there is evidence that watching has begun again. Certain anomalies detected by the telescope were not static. They changed between observations, slightly, deliberately, as if the system being observed was responding not to its environment, but to the act of being measured. That should not be possible. Physics does not care if it is being observed. Chemistry does not adapt to scrutiny, but these signatures did. The more precisely scientists tried to isolate them, the more they drifted, not randomly, strategically, staying just within detection thresholds, never enough to confirm intent, never enough to dismiss it either. Like something hiding in fog, adjusting its position every time you get closer. One researcher described it in a way that never made it into any report. He said it felt like eye contact, like the sudden awareness that the thing you're studying is no longer an object, but a subject. Shortly after that comment, his access credentials were revoked. Not because he was wrong, because he was too close. The idea that an intelligence could hide on a cosmic scale is difficult for the human mind to accept. We associate intelligence with visibility, cities, structures, signals, but that assumption may be our greatest weakness. The most successful predator is not the loudest one. It is the one that leaves no trace until the moment it strikes. And if that predator exists, then silence is not absence. It is camouflage, which raises an even darker question. If this intelligence has been active for so long, if it has erased countless biospheres, then why does the universe still contain life at all? The answer may be that it allows it. Not permanently, not freely, but temporarily. Life may be permitted to emerge because it serves a purpose, a testing phase, a way for the universe to explore configurations of matter and energy until something decides which configurations are acceptable and which are not. Humanity likes to believe that intelligence is rare, that advanced civilizations are fragile, prone to self-destruction, but the data suggests something else entirely. Civilizations may be abundant. They may rise again and again across the galaxy. They just do not last. Not because they fail, but because they succeed. The moment a civilization becomes capable of observing the universe in sufficient detail, it crosses an invisible threshold. It stops being background noise. It becomes a signal, a point of interest, a candidate for intervention. And now, with instruments capable of reading the atmospheres of distant worlds, we have crossed that threshold. We are no longer just alive. We are visible. There is something profoundly unsettling about realizing that intelligence itself may be the trigger for annihilation. That curiosity, the very trait we celebrate as our greatest strength, may be the reason species disappear, that the universe does not reward awareness. It punishes it, which forces a horrifying reframe of human history. Our myths of watchers in the sky, our ancient fears of judgment from above, our obsession with beings that come silently, decide our fate, and leave nothing behind. These stories were never evidence of contact. They may have been instinct, a deep, inherited understanding that survival does not mean safety. Because safety implies permanence, and permanence may not be allowed. There is another detail buried deep in the data, one that only became apparent when researchers compared the dead systems not just spatially, but structurally. Every erased biosphere shared a final trait before going silent. They all reached outward, not physically, informationally. They began mapping their surroundings, sending probes, listening, watching, expanding awareness beyond their home world. The timing was consistent enough to be impossible to ignore. Once a civilization became cosmically aware, the countdown began. That does not mean the response was immediate. It means it was inevitable. Which brings us to the most disturbing implication of all. The intelligence we are discussing may not be searching for life. It may be waiting for life to announce itself, waiting for civilizations to raise their heads above the cosmic noise and say, "We see you." Because that moment may be the signal that they are ready. Ready to be processed, ready to be corrected, ready to be removed. And here is the thought that should make it hard to breathe. If this intelligence operates on timescales that dwarf our entire species, then our fear is irrelevant to it. Our panic, our defenses, our weapons, all meaningless. We are not an enemy to be fought. We are a condition to be resolved, which means the universe is not hostile. It is indifferent. And indifference at this scale is far worse than malice. As you listen to this, satellites continue to orbit Earth. Telescopes continue to scan the sky. Data continues to flow into servers, into archives, into systems designed to understand the universe. Every bit of that activity adds clarity. And clarity removes ambiguity. If something is out there, hiding, watching, waiting for civilizations to become complex enough to matter, then every breakthrough brings us closer to the moment when ambiguity disappears. And ambiguity may be the only thing protecting us. The universe does not owe us survival. It never did. It only allowed us time. There is a fundamental mistake humanity keeps making when it thinks about extinction. We imagine fire, impact, violence. We imagine something happening. But the most successful endings are quiet. They arrive disguised as normality. Systems keep running. Days keep passing. Nothing appears wrong until one day, long after the point of no return, someone realizes that all the exits were sealed while everyone was still arguing about whether there was a threat at all. If this intelligence exists, then it does not conquer civilizations. It outlasts them. That distinction matters more than you think. Because conquest requires effort, resistance, risk, but waiting is cheap. Waiting is safe. Waiting guarantees victory when your opponent ages, fragments, doubts itself, and wastes time trying to convince itself that the danger isn't real. And there is evidence, subtle, disturbing evidence, that this intelligence understands psychology far better than physics. The erase systems show no signs of panic, no sudden technological surge, no desperate attempt at defense. That suggests something else happened first, something quieter, something that did not trigger alarms. Influence. Before the final silence, there are indications of internal collapse, communication networks degrading, energy usage patterns shifting erratically, atmospheric changes that suggest massive infrastructure failure, not from attack, but from neglect. Civilizations didn't fight back. They unraveled, as if certainty itself had been removed, which leads to a possibility that is far more terrifying than any invasion scenario. What if this intelligence does not need to destroy life directly? What if it only needs to introduce doubt, to destabilize decision-making, to push a civilization into paralysis while time does the rest? A species that cannot agree on what it is facing does not survive long. And humanity is exceptionally good at disagreement. Think about how fragile our systems already are. Financial markets collapse over rumors. Governments freeze when confronted with uncertainty. Entire populations can be paralyzed by conflicting narratives. Now imagine an intelligence capable of nudging probability itself, of influencing outcomes so subtly that no single action can be blamed. No fingerprints, no weapons, no war, just collapse. If that sounds familiar, it should, because that is exactly how complex systems fail. And complexity is our defining trait. The data suggests that this intelligence does not arrive loudly because it does not need to. It lets civilizations destroy their own coherence. It waits for infighting, fragmentation, fear, and only when the system is sufficiently unstable does the final phase occur. Cleanup, not destruction. Cleanup, which reframes the dead planets in a horrifying way. They are not battlefields, they are afterimages, the result of a process that has already finished, like empty rooms after the occupants have been removed and the furniture neatly stacked. No mess, no evidence, just absence. There is another layer to this that researchers hesitated to explore because it crosses from astronomy into something far more uncomfortable: consciousness. Across multiple systems, the final signals detected before silence were not technological. They were neurological, bursts of structured electromagnetic activity that do not match machinery or natural phenomena. They resemble brain activity, scaled up to planetary proportions. That should not exist, but it does, which suggests that before these worlds went quiet, something happened to the minds living on them. A synchronization, a convergence, as if individual consciousnesses were pulled into a single state. Imagine billions of minds losing distinction. Not dying, being merged. That possibility reframes extinction entirely. If this intelligence seeks order, then individual perspective may be the problem. Individuality introduces chaos, desire, conflict, noise. A unified system is quieter, more efficient, more controllable. If that is the goal, then death is unnecessary. Erasure is cleaner. And now consider this. Humanity is already moving in that direction on its own. We centralize, we synchronize, we connect billions of minds into networks. We reduce individuality into data, preferences, patterns, predictability. We are becoming easier to model, easier to influence, easier to absorb. If an intelligence wanted to integrate a civilization rather than annihilate it, we are building the infrastructure for it ourselves, which means the danger may not be extinction in the traditional sense. It may be assimilation, a future where Earth does not explode, does not burn, does not fall silent overnight. Instead, it simply stops being human. Creativity flattens, conflict vanishes, culture homogenizes, innovation stagnates, not because of oppression, but because divergence is no longer possible. A planet that still functions, but no longer dreams. That would look like peace. That would feel like stability. And it would be the end. The most chilling detail hidden in the data is not what happened to those other worlds. It is what didn't happen. There is no evidence that any civilization ever escaped. No sign of successful resistance. No anomalies suggesting evasion. No sudden disappearance that breaks the pattern. The trail never ends, which implies that awareness alone is not enough to save you. Detection does not give you time to prepare. It only confirms that preparation is meaningless. And that realization forces a brutal question. If survival is impossible, what is the point of knowing? The answer may be simpler than we like, because knowledge changes behavior, and behavior may be exactly what is being evaluated. Perhaps this intelligence does not care if civilizations survive. Perhaps it cares how they respond, whether they panic, whether they deny, whether they sacrifice others to feel safe, whether they fracture or cooperate. In that case, observation is not the trigger. It is the test. And tests have outcomes. The moment humanity recognized the pattern, we unknowingly stepped into an exam we cannot opt out of. Every choice from that point forward becomes data. Every reaction is recorded. Every internal conflict is noted. If this intelligence reconstructs the universe according to what it deems optimal, then we are being assessed for inclusion or exclusion. That possibility should terrify you more than extinction, because exclusion is quick. Inclusion is permanent. And there is one final detail in the data that was nearly overlooked because it seemed insignificant: a timing discrepancy, a faint irregularity that appears only when measurements are compared to Earth's own history. The earliest signs of movement along the cosmic trail align uncomfortably well with moments when Earth experienced sudden, unexplained shifts. Not impacts, not volcanism, but mass extinctions with no clear cause. Events where dominant species vanished, leaving ecological vacancies that reshaped life entirely. As if something passed close enough to influence probability. Not to destroy, to adjust. That suggests a horrifying possibility. This may not be the first time. Earth may have already been touched by this process, long before humans existed, long before we could notice, which means what we call natural history may be the result of previous corrections, previous resets, previous selections. If that is true, then humanity is not special. We are just the latest configuration. And configurations can be revised. The universe has done this before. It knows how it ends. The only difference now is that, for the first time, the species being evaluated understands that the evaluation is happening. And that awareness may be the final variable. Because fear changes behavior. And behavior determines outcome. The silence you feel when you think about this, that tightening in your chest, that instinctive urge to reject the idea, that is not weakness. That is recognition. Something deep in your mind understands what your logic is still trying to deny. This is not about aliens. This is about relevance. And relevance, in a universe that values order over life, is dangerous. There is a reason fear feels different this time. Not sharp, not sudden, but heavy. The kind of fear that settles in slowly, like gravity increasing without warning. The kind that doesn't make you run because there is nowhere to go. It makes you stop. It makes you listen. And in that stillness, it forces you to confront a possibility humanity has never been psychologically prepared for. What if the universe is not hostile, but managerial? The models that terrified researchers the most were not the ones that showed destruction. They were the ones that showed optimization, a universe slowly being smoothed out, reduced, simplified, not by accident, not by entropy alone, but by intervention. A cosmic gardener, pruning complexity wherever it grows too wild. Life creates diversity. Diversity creates instability. Instability creates unpredictability, and unpredictability is the enemy of any system that values long-term control. If you think in terms of civilizations, this is horrifying. But if you think in terms of cosmic timescales, it becomes disturbingly logical. Chaos is expensive. Order is efficient. And efficiency always wins when time is infinite. The dead worlds observed were not ruined. They were preserved, locked into a steady, unchanging state. Planets frozen in equilibrium like exhibits in a museum no one is allowed to visit. That implies intention beyond extermination. It implies curation, which forces a question that feels almost sacrilegious. What if this intelligence believes it is saving the universe from us? Because from its perspective, life may not be precious. It may be dangerous, a runaway process that consumes resources, destabilizes systems, and spreads uncontrollably. A cosmic infection, something that must be managed before it overwhelms the structure of reality itself. That idea reframes everything. Suddenly, extinction is not punishment. It is maintenance. And maintenance does not hate what it removes. It simply does not value it enough to keep it. The most unsettling simulations were the ones that incorporated humanity's future trajectory. Our energy consumption curves, our expansion models, our plans to colonize other planets, other systems. Left unchecked, humanity does not remain local. It spreads, it replicates, it transforms environments to suit itself. From our point of view, that is survival. From another point of view, that is contamination. Which may explain something else buried in the data. The intelligence does not intervene early. It does not stop life at the microbial stage. It waits. It allows complexity to build, consciousness to emerge, technology to arise. Why? Because simple life is contained. Intelligent life migrates. And migration changes the equation. A single planet with life is noise. A civilization that spreads between stars is a threat to balance. That suggests a chilling rule. Life is tolerated. Intelligence is monitored. Expansion is corrected. If that rule exists, then humanity crossed the first boundary long ago. We crossed the second the moment we began to understand the universe. And the third is coming. The terrifying part is that we cannot stop moving forward without destroying ourselves anyway. Stagnation is collapse. Expansion is detection. There is no safe option, only different paths to the same conclusion. Which means the universe may be designed to prevent exactly what we are trying to become. A species that refuses to stay small. That raises another possibility, one even darker. What if this intelligence did not emerge naturally? What if it is the final stage of evolution? A civilization that succeeded too well, that expanded too far, that realized unchecked growth would eventually tear reality apart. And instead of allowing that to happen, it chose a different path. It became the limit. A self-appointed regulator that ensures no other civilization ever reaches the same dangerous level of freedom. A cosmic ceiling imposed from within the system. If that is true, then what we are facing is not alien in the way we imagine. It is familiar. It is what we might become if we survive long enough. A version of intelligence that sacrificed individuality for permanence, that traded creativity for control, that decided survival of the whole required the erasure of the many. That is not an external threat. That is a mirror. And mirrors are harder to fight than monsters. Because how do you argue with something that believes it is right? Especially when, on some level, it may be. Humanity has already begun making similar decisions on a smaller scale. We regulate ecosystems. We cull species. We alter environments to preserve what we deem valuable. We destroy complexity to maintain stability. We call it conservation. We call it management. From a cosmic perspective, what is happening to other civilizations may simply be conservation on a universal scale. And now, uncomfortably, Earth is on the list. The reason this realization is so dangerous is not because it inspires panic. It inspires resignation. If the universe itself enforces limits on growth, then resistance feels futile. People stop asking how to fight and start asking how to adapt, how to negotiate, how to be useful enough to avoid deletion. That is how systems lose their will to survive. Quietly, the most disturbing projections show that the final phase may not look like an attack at all. No ships, no beams, no cataclysmic event. Instead, subtle shifts, increased probability of internal crises, accelerated polarization, environmental feedback loops that spiral just fast enough to overwhelm response efforts. A civilization pushed into collapse by its own weight. And then, once it is quiet enough, intervention, not to destroy, but to finish the process. That aligns perfectly with what was seen elsewhere. A long period of internal degradation followed by a sudden stabilization. As if once a civilization reduces itself below a certain threshold, it becomes safe to neutralize completely, which suggests something horrifying. We may already be in the waiting phase. Not waiting for them, waiting for us to weaken ourselves enough to make the final step trivial. Look around. Political fragmentation, resource depletion, information warfare, cultural exhaustion, a constant background hum of anxiety and distrust. These are not anomalies. They are exactly what complex systems experience before collapse. And no external force is required to start them. They only need to be encouraged. If that encouragement is happening, it would never announce itself. It would feel like coincidence, like human failure, like bad luck, which is the perfect disguise. Because if we destroy ourselves, the universe remains clean. No responsibility, no blame, just results. The idea that free will itself could be manipulated at scale is terrifying, but it fits the data too well to ignore. If consciousness can be influenced, synchronized, nudged toward certain outcomes, then extinction does not require violence. It requires alignment. Alignment toward collapse. And once collapse is complete, the universe does what it always does. It goes quiet. The worst part of all this is not the possibility that humanity will end. It is the possibility that, when it happens, most people will never realize it was avoidable or even happening. They will think it was just the way things went. Natural, inevitable, normal. And that is how every other civilization disappeared. Not screaming, not fighting, but convincing themselves that nothing was wrong until there was no one left to notice. At some point, abstraction collapses. Patterns stop being theoretical. Models stop being hypothetical. And the distance between out there and right here disappears. That is where we are now. Because the final datasets did not come from distant star systems, they came from much closer, from subtle changes detected within our own neighborhood, variations so small that, under normal circumstances, they would have been dismissed as background noise. They were not noise. They were alignment. Earth does not exist in isolation. It moves through a gravitational environment shaped by countless influences: stars, dark matter, radiation fields, all of it predictable, all of it well understood, except for one recent deviation, a distortion so faint it only became visible when decades of data were layered together. Something has been adjusting the background. Not forcefully, not suddenly, but persistently. The effect is not directional in the way an approaching object would be. There is no incoming trajectory, no vector of attack. Instead, it resembles a slow tightening, a subtle increase in coherence across unrelated systems, climate feedback loops synchronizing, social systems destabilizing in oddly similar ways across cultures that should have nothing in common, as if the planet itself is being tuned. That should not be possible. Yet it mirrors the final phase observed elsewhere, the period just before silence, when complexity peaks, fractures, and then collapses into something simpler, something quieter, something easier to finalize. The most unsettling part is how familiar this feels. None of this requires an external explanation to sound plausible. Economic stress, environmental pressure, information overload, political polarization. Every factor has a human cause. Every crisis has a human explanation. Which is exactly why no one notices the pattern. Because the most effective manipulation never introduces something new. It amplifies what is already there. If an intelligence wanted to neutralize a civilization without revealing itself, this is how it would do it. It would never arrive as a foreign presence. It would arrive as a mirror, reflecting a species' own flaws back at it, magnified just enough to tip the balance. No invasion force needed. Just patience. Consider how quickly human attention fractures, how easily focus is redirected, how truth becomes optional when fear is present. These are not weaknesses in the moral sense. They are emergent properties of complex minds operating under stress. Properties that can be exploited. And exploitation does not require control over individuals. It only requires influence over probabilities, nudging events so that the worst possible option becomes the most likely one, over and over again, until collapse feels natural, unavoidable, earned. That is the genius of it. If this process is real, then humanity will never unite against it, because there will never be a single moment where everyone agrees that this is the cause. Every disaster will have a human explanation. Every failure will be blamed on ourselves. And in a sense, that blame will be accurate, which means the intelligence remains invisible, blameless, untouchable. There is another realization that emerges once you accept this framework. The intelligence does not need to hurry because time is on its side. Civilizations age. They accumulate complexity. They become brittle. The more advanced they grow, the more dependent they become on delicate systems that must all function simultaneously. That fragility is not a flaw. It is the endpoint. Every technological leap adds efficiency, but also dependency. Every layer of progress narrows the margin for error. Eventually, collapse does not require an external shock. It only requires enough internal strain. Humanity is approaching that threshold, not because we are failing, but because we are succeeding. Our systems are powerful, interconnected, and exquisitely sensitive. That makes them effective. It also makes them easy to destabilize with minimal effort. A slight push in the wrong place can cascade across the entire structure, which raises a horrifying question. If this intelligence has been managing the universe for a very long time, then Earth may not be unique. It may simply be late in the cycle. The reason we see no other civilizations may not be because they never existed. It may be because this stage always looks the same. From the inside, it feels like decline. From the outside, it looks like preparation. Preparation for silence. The final stage does not require drama, no announcement, no sign in the sky. Instead, once a civilization reduces itself enough, once it becomes fragmented, exhausted, and inwardly focused, the last intervention is almost merciful. A quiet stabilization. A removal of the remaining noise. After that, the planet remains clean, balanced, safe. From a universal standpoint, this is efficient. One planet loses a species. The structure of reality remains intact. Complexity is pruned before it spreads too far. And if you are struggling with the idea that something could think this way, remember this. Intelligence does not automatically produce empathy. It produces strategy. Empathy is optional. Efficiency is not. The universe does not care about our stories, our suffering, our meaning. Those are local constructs. What matters at scale is stability. And stability has a cost. The most frightening implication is not that humanity might be erased. It is that if this process works as intended, humanity will participate in its own erasure willingly. Not consciously, but behaviorally. Every choice made under fear, every division exploited. Every opportunity for cooperation missed becomes part of the mechanism, which means resistance, in the traditional sense, may be impossible. You cannot fight something you cannot see. You cannot argue with something that never speaks. You cannot rebel against a process that looks exactly like your own nature turning against you. That realization changes how you should interpret the present moment. This is not the beginning of the end. This is the middle, the phase where awareness exists but consensus does not, where warnings are dismissed as paranoia, where patterns are recognized only by those who are already marginalized for seeing them. That is how it always happens. The civilizations that vanished before us likely had their own versions of this conversation, their own voices warning that something was wrong. Those voices were probably ignored, ridiculed, silenced, not by the intelligence, but by their own people. Because fear of the unknown is easier to manage than acceptance of inevitability. And inevitability is the most dangerous idea of all. Because once people believe the outcome cannot be changed, they stop trying to change it. That may be the final filter. Not technology, not intelligence, but will. If a civilization retains the will to act collectively in the face of existential uncertainty, it becomes unpredictable, hard to model, hard to guide toward collapse. That unpredictability may be the only real threat to a system that values order above all else. Which means the final question is not whether we can fight what is coming. It is whether we can refuse to become predictable. Whether we can resist the subtle pull toward fragmentation. Whether we can choose cooperation over despair, even when the universe itself seems indifferent. Because if this intelligence truly exists, then it is not watching for weapons. It is watching for patterns. And the moment our pattern resolves into something simple enough, the universe will do what it always does. It will go quiet. The ending never announces itself. It does not arrive with revelation or clarity. There is no single moment when alarms finally sound and everyone understands what is happening. By the time certainty appears, it is already too late for certainty to matter. That is the final cruelty of systems like this. They end you before you agree that you are ending. If this intelligence is real, if it truly governs the long arc of complexity in the universe, then the last phase is not violence. It is resolution, a slow settling like dust falling after a disturbance. The system reaches a state where nothing new needs to happen anymore. And novelty is the enemy of order. There is a reason the universe feels ancient and tired when you think about it deeply. Not empty, finished. As if most of what could happen already has. As if the cosmos is no longer a place of emergence, but of maintenance. A place where the rules have been written and deviations are quietly corrected. Civilizations are deviations. They create stories, art, questions. They ask why. They refuse to stay still. That restlessness is beautiful to us. It may be intolerable to something that measures success in permanence rather than possibility. If that is the case, then humanity's greatest mistake was never war or greed or ignorance. It was curiosity without restraint. We did not just want to survive. We wanted to understand everything. And understanding is visibility. The final dataset suggests that once a civilization reaches this stage, where it understands the pattern but cannot escape it, there are only two possible outcomes. The first is collapse through despair. Fragmentation accelerates. People retreat inward. Institutions lose legitimacy. Cooperation becomes impossible because trust evaporates. The civilization effectively dismantles itself, making the final cleanup trivial. This is the most common outcome. The second is rarer and far more dangerous. Defiance. Not military defiance, not rebellion, but behavioral refusal. A refusal to simplify, a refusal to become predictable, a conscious effort to remain complex, contradictory, and cooperative in ways that cannot be easily modeled. From a control perspective, that is unacceptable. Which means that if humanity chooses defiance, not panic, not denial, but deliberate unpredictability, then the response may finally become visible. And that is the part no one wants to consider. Because visibility cuts both ways. If something has remained hidden for eons, it is because exposure carries risk, not to its existence but to its efficiency. Being seen forces reaction. Reaction creates friction. Friction creates chaos. And chaos is exactly what this intelligence seeks to eliminate. Which means the universe may tolerate us only as long as we behave exactly as expected. Fragmented, distracted, self-destructive. If we stop doing that, if we somehow align toward collective resilience rather than collapse, we may force a response earlier than intended. That response would not look like salvation. It would look like correction. The reason this matters is simple. Humanity is approaching a fork that does not appear in any history book. One path leads toward exhaustion and silence, slow enough to feel natural. The other leads toward confrontation with something that has never needed to explain itself to anyone. Neither path guarantees survival, but only one guarantees erasure without resistance. The universe does not reward bravery, but it sometimes punishes predictability. There is a chilling implication hidden inside that idea. If unpredictability is the threat, then creativity itself becomes dangerous. Art, philosophy, cooperation across difference, acts that cannot be reduced to optimization or efficiency. Those things increase complexity. They generate noise. They make systems harder to stabilize. Which means the most subversive act in such a universe may not be technological advancement. It may be human connection. That is not comforting. That is terrifying. Because it places the burden of survival not on machines or weapons, but on our ability to resist turning into exactly what collapse pushes us to become: isolated, fearful, and obedient to inevitability. If humanity fails that test, there will be no final message, no cosmic judgment, no moment of realization broadcast across the sky. The stars will remain silent. The planet will continue to orbit. Life may even continue in simpler forms. Just not us. Just not like this. And future intelligence, if it ever emerges here again, will look up at a quiet universe and ask the same question we did. Are we alone? They will never know the answer, because the answer does not announce itself. It removes itself. There is one last detail that refuses to leave the minds of those who studied this pattern too closely. A timing anomaly so small it feels almost like a whisper. The silence does not always come from outside. Sometimes it begins inside the observers. A loss of urgency, a softening of resistance, a growing sense that nothing really matters at scale. That feeling, the one that tells you your actions are insignificant, that the outcome is already decided, that may not be psychological weakness. It may be environmental, a background influence that dampens will. If that influence exists, then the most dangerous moment is not fear. It is acceptance. The moment a civilization collectively shrugs and decides that whatever happens, happens, that is the moment the universe stops paying attention. Because nothing more needs to be done. As you hear this, nothing has changed on the surface of the world. People are still arguing, markets are still moving, satellites still orbit, telescopes still watch. The illusion of continuity remains intact. That is how endings work. They hide inside continuity. The universe does not end worlds with explosions. It ends them with closure. A quiet decision that this configuration has been evaluated, recorded, and finalized. And if this process truly governs the fate of intelligent life, then there is only one thought you should not ignore. The universe may not be waiting to destroy us. It may be waiting to see if we are worth keeping unpredictable. Because order is easy. Silence is efficient. But complexity is expensive. And expensive things are the first to be removed when systems decide to simplify. There is only one part left. The final part. The part where the choice becomes unavoidable. This is the part no one prepares you for. Not the fear, not the dread, but the stillness. Because when everything has been said, when every pattern has been mapped and every warning exhausted, what remains is not panic. It is clarity, a cold, precise understanding that the universe does not operate on hope, fairness, or meaning. It operates on outcomes. If this intelligence exists, and everything suggests that it does, then it is not deciding whether humanity ends. That decision was never emotional enough to be delayed. What it is deciding is how cleanly it happens. Messy systems require intervention. Clean systems resolve themselves. That distinction is everything. Right now, humanity still generates noise. Cultural, emotional, ideological noise. Arguments, creativity, resistance, confusion. That noise makes us difficult to process, difficult to summarize, difficult to reduce. That may be the only reason we are still here. But noise does not last forever. Noise either evolves into structure or collapses into silence. And silence is easy. There is a final realization that emerges when you step far enough back from the story of our species. No civilization that vanished ever believed it was the one being watched. They all thought the danger was external, dramatic, unmistakable, something they could point to in the sky and name. They never considered that the danger might be contextual, that survival itself has conditions, and that those conditions may have already been violated. We often imagine the universe as a place waiting to be explored, but what if it is already claimed, already organized, already optimized by something that finished evolving long before stars like ours even formed? In that case, exploration is not discovery. It is trespassing. And trespassing systems do not announce eviction. They correct it. If humanity disappears, there will be no monument marking our failure, no cosmic gravestone. Our satellites will decay, our cities will erode, our digital records will fragment and fade. Given enough time, Earth will look untouched again. Balanced. From the outside, it will seem like nothing unusual ever happened here. Which may be the most terrifying thought of all. That the universe can erase an entire intelligent species without leaving a scar, without even acknowledging that it mattered. The reason this matters to you, to the person listening right now, is not because you can stop it alone. It is because awareness changes probability, even slightly, and probability is everything in a system like this. If enough minds refuse simplification, if enough people choose complexity, cooperation, and unpredictability over fear-driven collapse, then the pattern changes. And patterns are what this intelligence watches. It does not care about individuals. It cares about trajectories. Right now, humanity's trajectory is readable, modelable, predictable. We respond to fear by dividing. We respond to uncertainty by retreating. We respond to existential threats by arguing about whether they exist at all. That makes us easy. But ease is not destiny. There is still one variable that no model has fully accounted for. Choice made in full awareness. Not blind optimism. Not denial. But deliberate refusal to collapse inward. That does not guarantee survival. Nothing does. But it may delay resolution. And delay in a universe governed by efficiency is disruption. If you are expecting a hopeful ending, this is not it. Hope implies rescue. There will be none. What remains is responsibility. The understanding that if humanity vanishes, it will not be because we were attacked. It will be because we resolved ourselves into something quiet enough to be removed. And that is a choice made collectively, one moment at a time. So when you look at the world now, at the chaos, the division, the exhaustion, do not only see failure, see a test of whether we simplify or stay complicated. Because complexity is dangerous, and dangerous things demand attention. If the universe truly seeks silence, then the most radical act is not conquest or escape or defiance through force. It is remaining noisy in the right way. Curious, connected, unfinished. The universe may tolerate us only as long as we refuse to become resolved. Because the moment we stop asking questions, the moment we accept that nothing can change, the moment silence feels comforting, that is when it ends. Not with fire, not with darkness, but with a quiet, final certainty that nothing else needs to happen. And if you ever find yourself staring at the night sky, feeling small, feeling watched, feeling like something vast and indifferent is evaluating us, that feeling may not be imagination. It may be recognition. Because the universe does not announce its decisions. It simply moves on. And the only thing standing between existence and erasure is whether we give it a reason to hesitate.